Good afternoon. I'm Brian Cox. Are you all enjoying the show? I hope. Yes. Wow, quite, I haven't even made it into the showroom during the day, only last night, but the number of people is amazing. This is really exciting to be here for the second year in a row. It doesn't take long, though, I'll show you, because I was just a visitor last time, and now look, here I'm on stage, so you're all next. Now, as I did say, my name is Brian Cox. I'm the owner of FutureVision Research, and we started out as an educational company for electronic kits. I actually taught soldering and electronics in person at a location here in Riverside, California, here in Southern California. Sadly, they closed during the pandemic, and I was looking for some place to teach. And I actually have one of my students here that I see in the audience where I teach online now, electronics and soldering as well. But I found that I needed to create the kits for the supplies that students needed to use. So I started creating learn to solder kits, and we've now branched into FujiNet, which is the topic of today. I actually met Thomas Cherryholmes here for the first time. He is one of the main developers for FujiNet on the software side. He mentioned on this very stage that they needed more people to build them, and so here I am. I now have actually a few hundred under my belt now that we've made across the different platforms. So what I want to do today is tell you about FujiNet, give you an overview of the devices that are currently available, give you a little slideshow demonstration of what it's like to power one up, and then I'll share with you your support options on where you'd actually go to learn more and actually get to work on one of your own. Now, right now, we have 3 platforms that are considered production ready and one that is so close to production ready. Let me tell you, though, first, I actually did a wonderful video, if I do say so myself, with the Vint Nerd. I say wonderful because Steve kept me going, and we went through all the platforms and shared how they all work. But my daughter watched it, and she has a son of her own, and she called me up and she says, "Well, Dad, wonderful video, but I have a question. What's FujiNet?" Like, okay, we realized we have a 2-hour video where we didn't actually explain what that is. So let's start with that. Inspired by the name of the Atari Fuji logo, the FujiNet devices are intended to connect your computers to the modern world. And when I say your computers, I'm talking old computers, right? And we're aiming for 8 bits. Thomas Cherryholmes has said that the hill he's going to die on is getting a FujiNet on every platform that exists. And they're well on their way. But what happens is these devices connect to your 8-bit computer, and while they're usually described as an internet or a network device, it's so much more. FujiNet devices actually emulate a floppy drive. In other words, they behave like a floppy drive. They behave like a printer. They behave like a modem. And you can actually allow your old software to see the FujiNet as if it is one of those old original devices. It's pretty amazing. Now, to show you what we have on the screen, the top 3, if we had more time, we might play Guess the Platform. But one of the wonderful things with the FujiNet community is there's various people from various walks of life who have their systems that they know and love. So the top 3 are actually all for the Atari 8-bits. And they've designed them to match somewhat the best we can the case that the platform is intended. So we have the Atari 400 and 800. Yes, the FujiNet can work on the late 1970s Atari 400 and 800 computers. Then we actually have the Atari XE in the middle. I didn't put these in chronological order, did I? And then the XLs coming up. At first, when I first started making the FujiNets, I did just the XL case, because after all, it ties up my 3D printer for a while to me making all of these cases. The cases and the actual interface plugs, in the case of the Atari, the SIO, serial interface, or I should say serial input-output, all of those parts have to be 3D printed, and all the pins have to be soldered by hand, because they don't make that darn connector anymore. But then coming down on the bottom row, we have the color computer cartridge, and that works on the 1, 2, and 3, and just in the last few weeks, the Dragon 3264 now, also, the Coco compatibles. In the middle is the Apple 2 and 3, And that one comes with an accessory kit. Because of the versatility of the FujiNet for Apple, we need some various connection methods, so I bundle them all in. Last but not least, anyone want to guess what's down here in the lower right? Believe it or not, Coleco Atom. So these are the FujiNets that are now available. I am building and making these at the moment, and I do my best to keep them all in stock. Now, if we're talking FujiNet, what's under the hood, so to speak? The FujiNet devices actually run on an ESP, I have a typo, ESP32W Rover E. That would be the brain, and so this would be the main brain doing all of the thinking. But when I say thinking, it's not running the 8-bit programs, it's running the software written in C that is actually emulating all of these various devices. It's taking care of all of the network traffic with the internet, with Wi-Fi, and it's taking care of emulating, like I said, all those different devices. And the different ESP32s were usually, for the most part, using the W Rover E. The only one that's different right now is the color computer cartridge, because we find that with that cartridge, it's plugged down inside the computer, and using the built-in Wi-Fi adapter that these ESPs have, we're not getting good signal strength. So we use one that actually has an external antenna that can kind of reach out from the side. In fact, the first versions actually had a separate antenna, and now at least we have it inside the cartridge. Now, what's amazing, and I'll give you one, this is under the category of where are we at with the FujiNet project. They have now determined that they want to work on cartridge interfaces. I'll talk about how each FujiNet communicates, but you notice we only have one that's a cartridge bus, so to speak, and that's the color computer. But they've determined that the Raspberry Pi Pico RP2040, I really wish they would have had a smaller name, but there you go. It is fast enough to take care of bus communications on these various devices. And what they're doing now is they are pairing an RP2040 with the ESP32 on one board, and they each do their job. The RP2040 takes care of bus communication, the ESP32 takes care of FujiNet, and together we are opening up the FujiNet devices to platforms. If they have a cartridge bus, we want to see a FujiNet on it. Now, we're still working on them ironing out details. The FujiNet project, after all, is all volunteer, and it is all open source. So Thomas Cherryholmes, I'll hear from him if I don't mention, we need help. So I'm going to show you how you can communicate with the FujiNet team. If you know coding, if you know hardware, you know 3D design, we'd love to bring you into the project and work. Give me more to build, and I'll make them. You guys to design them. Now, let's talk about the various platforms. We have the Atari 8-bits, and this is where we started. After all, that's where the name FujiNet came from, was, again, as I mentioned, the Atari logo. We have the same device inside, just 3 different shells. And we find many users like to have a shell that matches a little bit closer to their original device. I find, though, even though I test my FujiNet Ataris on an Atari XL, but I kind of cringe because I have not done RetroBrite on mine yet. So here I have my dusty, dingy 800 case, and I bring in this nice glowing XL that I just 3D printed, like, ooh, the contrast. But it's still, at least the style matches the same. So all 3 of these then do connect to the SIO port. And the FujiNet devices maintain your ability to daisy chain. So we have the plug on the front and a receptacle on the back. So you could actually plug in other devices that you didn't want the FujiNet to emulate. You could continue on your SIO daisy chain, and it won't have a problem with that. Next up would be the Apple II and III platform. Now this one gets a little bit more into the weeds on what we need to do to actually make it work with our Apples. While the Atari, it's all the same. That SIO port has stayed the same across all the 8-bits, from the 400, 800, all the way into the XEs. When we get to the Apples, this FujiNet is designed for the 2 and 3, but we need smart port capability. Smart port would actually be the floppy connection. So if you have a 2GS, a 2C, hashtag except for the first ROM, or a 2C plus, you're good to go. If you don't know what 2C ROM you have, you can actually print peek that address and it will return back your ROM version. If it says 255 or FF, then you kind of say, well, I guess I'm replacing a ROM. But at least it's still available. You can actually replace it. The ROM is not too bad. You actually can get the new EEPROM, and then all you have to do is cut one little jumper that's designed to be cut when you upgrade to it, and you're good to go. And there's videos online that can show you how to do that. Now, if you have a smart port card, then that opens you up to other Apples as well, the 2 Plus, 2E, as you see up here. I'll go ahead and name them all in case someone's listening to this as a podcast. You could do the 2E Platinum or Enhanced, and then most of the clones, hey, it's a clone, so don't come to me if it doesn't work on, a Franklin or something like that. And then the Apple 3 and 3 Plus. One note, I have found that on most 3s, you do need a different little adapter plug to plug into it because some of them have crossed power connections. And when you go to FujiNet online, I'll show you that link here coming up at the conclusion. You can go to the FujiNet website and there's a list of vendors that are making devices. We have one called K-Mac, C-A-Y Mac, and he is really aiming for that, of course, Apple market, but then also for the Apple 3s, and he makes that separate adapter that you would need. Now, in regards to SmartPort, what if you have a 2E? It is not going to support SmartPort right out of the box. You need a card to do that. And now I do have a list on my website, fvresearch.com, and with links to the known cards that will work. And I love how this is actually copied straight out of the GitHub, which is available on the FujiNet GitHub. These have been extensively tested, so I like that. So if you have the soft SP card or an A2 Pico with soft SP, as you can see, V6, there's some qualifiers. These are the interfaces you would need to work with your Apple II devices. And when you go to my website or the FujiNet GitHub, then you can get links to vendors who have that. As usual with these devices, the availability will varies, but it doesn't hurt to go and take a look at it. Okay, so that's the Apple. What about Coleco Atom? The Coleco Atom is nice and straightforward. We have the AtomNet port. It's fun because it's like, have you ever woke up in the morning, boy, I sure wish I could plug in a telephone. I miss that plug. Click, right? Well, this is an RJ11, and that connector just plugs right into the left side of the Atom, and then it plugs into, of course, your FujiNet for Coleco Atom. What's nice is across all of the devices that bear the FujiNet name, the intention is you power up and you boot into the FujiNet menu. And that is even true with the Atom. Now, a quick note also, when we come to the Coleco Atom, this is one that's been exciting to see how the FujiNet progress is intensely supported. When they first started writing the internal operating system for the FujiNets, it was a little slow in booting up. So the FujiNet wakes up, starts to bring in its file system, initializes, and meanwhile on the Atom's like, I'm here, let's go. I'm a word processor, type. And the FujiNet's still getting its coffee and brushing its teeth. And so you would actually end up in the word processor on the Atom instead of booting to the FujiNet. So the trick at the time was you needed to have external power, which is no longer needed, to power up the FujiNet so that it would boot first, wake up, get its coffee, brush its teeth, and then you'd power up the Atom, or you could try rebooting it. But now we're on version 1.4 of the FujiNet operating system, or what they call the firmware, and they tremendously sped up the boot time. So now across all of the what are considered production platforms, you can trust that FujiNet to power up as fast as the computer is, so you can get your FujiNet menu and go right in. So the Coleco Atom's working quite well. Now, that was the last of the production systems. So when I say production, that means the team, the community has said, these are ready. A general user can trust that this is going to work fairly reliably and not have any headaches. That's the Atari 8-bit, Apple II and 3, and then the Coleco Atom. Now the Tandy color computer is so close. It is so close that the firmware flasher actually has the firmware ready and publicly available for the Tandy color computers. What I mean by that is when you update your firmware, there's a little program that you install. The program only will list the FujiNets that are far enough along. If you want to work with any of the others that are still in development, you have to get into GitHub, and they make nightly compiles. So you don't have to compile it yourself, but you have to go and grab the firmware and then manually load it into the firmware flasher. But the color computer is there ready to go. Now, just here in the last few weeks, they actually updated the firmware, I should actually say the ROM for this. I mentioned how the FujiNets work off of an ESP32. Well, with the color computer version, it needs to boot as a cartridge, so it actually has an EEPROM in it running HBD DOS. And they've developed that DOS so that by using these two dip switches, you can set the version for booting a Coco 1, 2, or 3. And up to a couple of weeks ago, the fourth choice was actually a diagnostic ROM that could run tests on the Coco. Well, we had enough requests that they actually redid that, and it now will support the Dragon 3264. The catch is the serial port, which they're working very hard to eliminate. Right now, with the Coco cartridges that I'm building, you plug into the cartridge port, and then you have to plug into the serial port in the back. Without the serial port, you could boot into the FujiNet and say, oh, look, FujiNet, but you can't load anything. It actually is loading through that serial cable. With the Dragon 3264, the interface is slightly different. There is a connector on the circuit board, though, so you just have to make a different cable, and then you can plug it in. I have not tested that cable yet, so my color computer FujiNets are actually coming still with a diagnostic ROM as that last choice until I have a chance to test it. All right. Now, I'm checking the time because I want to make sure I have enough time for questions. Okay, I think we're doing good. Those are the production-ready FujiNets. What else is available? They are working on many different systems, and on my website at fvresearch.com, I actually have wait lists that you can join just so that you could stay in the loop. The FujiNet community is so vibrant, it is really hard to keep up, I find. And I'm going to show you an email list that you could join where I'll give you notices when things are coming out. But I also have wait lists. What do I have wait lists for? Well, the one that is getting the most subscriptions would be for the Commodore 64. Where's the darn Commodore FujiNet, people? Right, and if you're wondering that, then come and join the community and help get it ready. You may or may not know that we had a project for the Commodores called Meatloaf, and that was going to be the interface adapter for modern times. The Meatloaf developers have now been absorbed, or maybe assimilated would be the right term, into the FujiNet community, and they are now working on a FujiNet version that started as Meatloaf. But the goal is to move into the FujiNet ecosystem. So they are developing a Commodore 64 and 128 FujiNet, but it's still moving along. This is my personal theory is they're still working on finalizing the standard for working off a cartridge port, and I think that they may be working on that. But when we consider that everyone in the FujiNet community are doing this as volunteer time, sometimes there's lulls or gaps before we see something come out publicly. However, there is not a lull or a gap in activity. If you watch the Discord, which I'll show you a link for, there is vibrant activity daily, and I would say nightly too. You know how programmers are, right? Sometimes their schedules get reversed and they're up all night. Well, so in addition to Commodore 64, they are indeed working on FujiNet for the Atari 2600. And that's going to, of course, work off of cartridge. And this is where there's kind of a gasp, although that's becoming old news. But it was really fun to see 5-card stud drawn on an Atari 2600 screen. And they actually have that up and running and working. That leads me to bring something up. why work on having FujiNets for so many different platforms? The idea is not only are they developing the ability to bring in information to these individual platforms, but we're now talking about cross-compatibility between devices. I can fire up 5-card stud on an Apple II, and I could fire it up on an Atari 8-bit and play across the internet. And they've actually developed a game room, so you can actually go and visit that game room and see who might be available to play these different games. And that is something else that we're really looking for new developers is who would be interested in writing games or other activities that would be cross-platform compatible. And the FujiNet takes care of linking that back and forth. Let's take a few moments to go through what a sample power-up would look like with your FujiNet. Now, as soon as you power up a FujiNet device, regardless of the platform, it is immediately going to power up. You'll see the FujiNet logo, and then it is going to give you a list of Wi-Fi devices that it sees. Once you connect to one of those, typically typing it in, then you get your menu. They call it the host list. By default, it starts with the SD card reader at the top. So if you plug in an SD card, be sure it is exFAT format, by the way. If you try to format it off of Windows 11, nope, sorry, it's not going to work. I do have a link for an exFAT formatter for Windows that will allow you to format your SD cards so that it's compatible. And that has to do with this compatibility of how the reader, of course, with the ESP32 is actually functioning. But besides that, you'll notice the others that are already populated in that host list, those are examples of TNFS servers. TNFS is Trivial Network File System. This is a free standard that's available. And on the FujiNet website, they have a list of public servers that you could go and visit right now. They have various files that are shared and ready and available for you to connect. These are in the system by default. You'll notice down on the second portion of the host list, we have drive slots. So what you do is you pick the file you would like to load and you tell the FujiNet, I want that file in this drive slot. And that is enabling that floppy emulation to take place. Okay. So by the way, what if you power up your FujiNet and it doesn't ask you for a Wi-Fi connection? Well, that's probably because it remembers the last time you gave it Wi-Fi connection and it's reconnected. But notice, if you can or can't see on the screen, we have C for config. I am so grateful that they put tooltips right on these FujiNet screens trying to remember. And by the way, they do take advantage of the interface. So when you do this choices on a Coleco Atom, they have Roman numeral type function keys. They use those keys to navigate the menu. But if we go into config, you actually receive this screen that gives you the network information. So you can see the Wi-Fi that you've connected to, your IP address, your host name. Host name is useful because you can actually visit your FujiNet once it's on Wi-Fi from a modern browser. And I'll show you a screenshot of what that looks like. Many of these settings that I'm showing here, for instance, as the hosts and the drive slots, you can actually edit from a web browser on your quote-unquote modern computer. But that's kind of a side note showing you this config screen. Just to give you a quick reminder, let's say that we wanted to visit a TNFS server. We could choose atari-apps.errata.online. That one's actually one that Thomas Cherryholmes places a lot of files on. Once you visit that, then you'll actually get a file listing. And it's just really, I find fun to think about that it's literally loading this file listing over the internet on a 40-year-old computer. And notice that they have resources for all the major platforms that are now considered production ready. Apple II, Apple III, etc. If we were to go into the Atari 8-bit, then just as an example, here you can see many of the files that are available. And this is usually what I like to do for demos, is they have written a JSON parser. So right, that's JavaScript. So if you want to bring in JavaScript information, I know that you were just thinking yesterday, I sure wish I could follow my Mastodon account on my Atari 8-bit. Well, you can. Or if you're really wondering, I wonder where the International Space Station is. Well, you can actually come in here on any of the production-ready platforms, load up ISS, and then sure enough, it'll pull in the JSON data over the internet, which gives the location of the space station. Now, of course, don't quote me on this because this is an old screenshot, but here it is, right over here. That's where it was, at least when Steve and I recorded the video. And what's fun is with the Atari version, you can actually select from your menu to find out what astronauts are in space at that time. So that's, again, all coming over the internet live. Just to give you a quick reminder, what had happened here is when we select a file, for instance, like ISS, when you highlight the file, you press return and then tell it what drive spot you want it to be in, and if you would like it to be read-only or read-write. When we connect to the public servers, we like to keep it read-only, right, so we're not overriding anybody. But then you tell the FujiNet to reboot, and then it will load up the file right off of the FujiNet device over the internet. Now, when you select a file like this off of a TNFS server, it is not saving it locally to the FujiNet. It's loading it live as if it was coming off a floppy into RAM, and if you power off the device, that is now cleared. But remember, you could load files locally off the SD card if you wanted to. Now, I mentioned that there's a network interface. From a regular web browser, this is just a partial screenshot from this laptop, where you visit the web server for the FujiNet. There you can actually edit the hosts. You can select some information about printer emulation. If you really wanted it to appear like, I think Atari Writer is one of the, or something along those lines that's on there, they've actually gone through and designed a font set that looks just like those old dot matrix printers. So from your vintage software, you can say print to this printer, and the vintage software thinks it is printing to that device. FujiNet captures it, saves it as a PDF, and from this web browser, you can then download that PDF and print it on your modern printer. And the only thing that's missing is the tractor feed. So, okay, yeah, I need a rim shot. That's supposed to be a joke. No one ever laughs at that. I should really stop using that joke. I guess, I don't know, I get nostalgic about having to print my report for school and then rip that perforated tractor feed off the end.
We were expecting it to be in version 2.
Oh, right, okay, yes, okay, this is just coming soon, right? Now, what can you do to find out more about FujiNet? My first recommendation would be my Substack. Big surprise. I've created a Substack, which is basically an email list. fujinews.substack.com. A gentleman named Andrew Diller does an amazing job of putting out what he calls rapid updates. But unless you know how to subscribe to an RSS feed, he does not have a public announcement that says, hey, join my email list to find out about this. So I went ahead and did that. Whenever Andrew Diller puts out an update on one of these rapid lists, which are usually a culmination of news that he's gleaned from all the discords, then he puts that rapid update out. But also, for instance, I just sent out an announcement sharing the 2 VCF events that have FujiNet representation. So far, it's this here, VCF SoCal, and then VCF East are the 2 where I know that it's the movers and shakers in the FujiNet community will be there, either demonstrating, if not selling them as well. So if you'd like to subscribe to that, I welcome you to do so. Okay, now, what about other resources? If you'd like to know more about FujiNet, the top place to go would be FujiNet Online. That is the community website. This is where they're posting news. I've noticed in the last few months, Thomas Cherryholmes has been really working on posting articles where he is. He's been working a lot with the RS-232 version of FujiNet. Yes, indeed, it's going to work on your x86, 8088 PC compatibles off a serial port. And so he's been working on that, and he posts little news briefs about where he is with that setup. There's a very active user group. I almost said Usenet. Like, that's another vintage talk, I'm sure. But there's a Facebook group called FujiNet Users, That one is very active, and the FujiNet team does watch that user group too. So you're not, you ever notice where you post into a forum and you just kind of hit enter and cringe, like, what kind of yahoos am I going to get who think they know what they're talking about but don't? You're actually getting the really knowledgeable yahoos, because it's the actual FujiNet team who follows on the Facebook page. Now, they have a remarkably, I might say, ridiculously active Discord. I cannot personally keep up with that. Down the left-hand side of the screen, that's a partial screenshot of Discord channels that the FujiNet Discord has. Every platform that someone had half an idea that they might add gets its own channel so that they can start kicking around how it's going to work. And so if you are on Discord, join it. If you're not on Discord, get on Discord and then join this too. This is the Discord, I feel, even more than, frankly, the Facebook, is the best way to get help with your FujiNet device. Or if you're wondering if you should get one and you need to understand a capability or what you would do to get started, going into the Discord is really the best thing to go, and then Facebook after that. And of course, there's my website at fvresearch.com. I try to keep all the production FujiNets in stock. If I have one that's not in stock, then I have a wait list, so you'll receive a notification as soon as it's available and ready to go. So that's my presentation, and I'd definitely have time to field some questions if anyone has questions about the FujiNet devices or what else we're doing with FutureVision research. Let me know. Thank you. Yes?
The printer, it goes to a server someplace and comes back. Is that secure?
So the question was, how does the printer emulation work?
I'm asking if it's secure.
Oh, if it's secure, that actually remains local. So printer emulation remains local on the FujiNet device. So the ESP32 is actually running that software. So let's use the Atari as an example. The SIO port receives a signal that says, I would like to use the printer. The Atari operating system says, I'd like to use a printer. And then the FujiNet catches that, I'm a printer. And locally, it then interprets that, creates it as a PDF, and holds it in RAM on that device. But if you would like to then get it, then you're using the little file protocol server that you're then connecting over from a web browser is the easiest way. And then you're visiting that. And that's still local communication, so it does not have to go outside. And that's one of the wonderful things I say about FujiNets is you do not have to connect to the outside world unless you want to, but the ability is there if you want it. So thank you, that's a very good question. Any other? Yes, sir.
I haven't used it myself, but there is a virtual FujiNet for things like Altera, isn't there?
Yes, so the question was, isn't there a virtual FujiNet for Altera? Absolutely there is. And so Altera would be an Atari 8-bit emulator, I believe, right? And so, yes, and that is a wonderful tool for development. So you could actually, if you wanted to be working on developing a resource for the FujiNet, you bring it into Altera, and it's going to behave just like the real FujiNet will. And I find that would have been my plan if I wanted to try a live demo, but I learned long ago, right? Live demos are like working with children and animals. I was playing on a 40-year-old computer. I'd rather prefer screenshots, but yes, that is absolutely available. I think there was another question. Yes.
So you touched briefly on a future project using cartridge bus.
Yes.
Isn't that just like address and data? So why wouldn't you do sort of a similar thing with any of those computers that has card slots?
So the very good question. Let me repeat it for the recording. I mentioned how they're working on developing card bus interface versions. Why not do that with the ESP32 that's already in the FujiNet? Does that sum up?
I guess it's the interface. Instead of plugging into a smart port or an SIO, why wouldn't you just plug into the cartridge, the backplane, basically? Oh,
gotcha. So the why didn't we start with a backplane interface? And so this is getting into the origin of the FujiNet project. Remember that it actually started as a Atari device, right? And they, Thomas Cherry Holmes and then Moswald He likes to go by that as opposed to his real name. Or maybe Moswell, he prefers that as the real name. Besides the point, they were working on the Atari and they found, you know what, it is amazing the level of communication and sophistication they put on the SIO device. So they ran with that because it was so straightforward to use, and they were working at serial speeds. So they were able to take care of the communication at that lower speed. The problem that we're having now, as they're now spreading into more devices, is they need much faster speeds to keep up with the clock on these computers. And the ESP32, yes, I know it's still a 40-year-old clock, but it's still faster than the digital pins on an ESP32 were intended. So they're finding that now that they've looked into the RP2040, that is actually opened up the ability to move to the bus. So I think we probably have to ask Thomas Cherryholmes for sure, but my understanding would be, if you ever worked on a project, sometimes you have a certain avenue that you follow, and that's what you keep on working on, even though there could be a better way. But that's what happened. We did SIO, and then they moved to the floppy smart port support on the Apple, Coleco AtomNet. But now that they have this new device, the RP2040 is able to flip those bits so fast on the digital pins. Bus communication is trivial, really, I think is what it boils down to. But now, of course, they're getting it all to work together. So did that help answer? Yeah, okay. Right, exactly. And so that's what's going to happen is they're going to, once they solve this standard, I feel we're going to see the number of platforms really explode. But subscribe to to the subnet to find out for sure. Substack, I should say. Yes.
Hey, so you mentioned for different like software that you could use the FujiNet for. You mentioned like a game room, printing capabilities. You know, what are some of the other things that are available? I mean, obviously, yes, you're connecting to the modern internet, but you couldn't really do necessarily like a modern web browser or something on like an 8-bit computer. But,
right, gotcha.
But
So
what kind of things are out there?
Good question. So the question is, what other capabilities or abilities are out there for the FujiNet? Well, and what I would say is, and what I used the most before all my time was taking up building these, was the ability to emulate a floppy drive. I find just that in itself, because, right, let's face it, floppy drives are not trustworthy, right? They weren't even trustworthy when they were the way to save things. And so by having read-write ability on an SD card, no Wi-Fi at all, that I feel opens up large avenues, because if you really just decided, you know what, I want to code in good old Turbo Basic, whatever, then you could do that and save to an SD card. But some other abilities, the FujiNets do also emulate a modem. So if you're into, like we have AMI BBS here, I believe representing here at the show, but you could actually do Telnet BBS, excuse me, which means it's connecting over the internet, but you could use your original terminal software, and the terminal software thinks it's talking to a good old dial-up modem. So that's another ability that you have as well. And so I'm trying to think of some other abilities. The Mastodon server, that is another one. You can connect to a Mastodon server. And another one that was more fun, but it shows how the community will come together, is they actually wrote a election monitoring program. So we had, many of us on our kitchen counters had the election running with the presidential candidates and then Senate and House seats, and it was getting a JSON update over the internet. So what that shows is that you can receive live data also. And really now what's happening is the sky's the limit on what we can make available. But I agree, one of the tricks is that we're then dealing with computing power on the individual and then the graphic representation ability. But we are having some where you can browse. They do have some basic browsers. Yes?
Follow-up question then. So are you getting that JSON data from different APIs that are out there? Is that effectively how you're like...
So you're bumping up into my knowledge level, but yes, you can actually parse whoever you want to be available. So what's happened is they've developed a standard. They have a library that they've written for the FujiNet, and then you can give it the nitty-gritty on where you want it to be gathering the information. So for instance, and let me just repeat, the question was, where is it getting the JSON data? So, for instance, there's somebody else had made the ISS location, the International Space Station, publicly available as JSON data. And then they said, and here's where it is. And so then they were able to lock onto that, and then they just had to write the program to draw the graphic interface. And then that's available for you for any others. Let's go right there, and then.
To add to that, there's an end device, at least on Atari, and there's parsers on there. So there's an HTTP parser, there's a JSON parser, there's a bunch of things, and you can even do raw TCP. And so you open the end device specifying what parser and what access you want, and give it either the URL or the IP address or whatever you want, and then you can access it.
So thank you. So what was pointed out is there's end devices where you can bring in HTTP data, JSON, and you're even communicating with the TCP stack if you need to. And the FujiNet is taking care of all of that. Yes, let's go. Blue shirt.
So I'm using a FujiNet on an Apple IIc Plus.
Yes.
I think that bought from you, don't quite remember. So that system does not have card slots. You know, it plugs in the smart port, but you're talking about moving towards putting it on the bus, and I'm thinking, is this going to obsolete the on the smart port?
Right. No, not at all. So the question was, if we move to a bus, is it going to render these early connections obsolete? And so no, these still, what I would say, for instance, the Atari 8-bit and the Apple II, those are mature solutions, and they are now good and as stable as something working on 40-year-old technology can be. That is intended to stay there. Now, how much will they develop to stick with the hardware on this if we move to a bus? Their goal is to expand platforms, never to render one of the platforms obsolete. And what I find also amazing is when they update to a new version of the firmware versions is across all the platforms. So of course there's particulars that are different, but it's version 1.4 for the Atari 8-bits and for your Apple II. So they will be making sure that they don't break an Apple II if they add abilities to the firmware that support buses. That's my understanding, yes. Okay, I think we have 3 minutes left, so I think we can field a couple more questions if you'd like. Yes.
Do you attach to CPM machines?
What about the CPM machines?
Can you attach to CPM?
Let's see. So I believe so. On certain platforms, I've seen it. Have you seen that?
It runs a CPM. Actually.
So it actually runs a CPM.
So you can attach to the FujiNet and it actually has a CPM machine running. Just like for the Ataris, a couple of the floppy drives actually ran CPM as well. The FujiNet does.
Yes, so they are staying aware of CPM, and so thank you for that. Yes. Okay, I think I saw one more hand. All the way in the back, yes.
Are there, as you run the FujiNet, does it get hot? Are there any issues like that to deal with ventilation and things like that, or is it really a cool customer?
Right. So the question was, do you need ventilation or do the FujiNets ever get hot? I have not found them to ever have any problems with heat. You'll notice that in each of the different, in fact, I have them here, each of the different standards, they do have some ventilation holes. And but I have found that we are not taxing that ESP32 also at all, so we have not found any problems with heat. Even in fact, with the cartridge version for the Coco, that one really does not have any ventilation, and we haven't found any problems. The biggest problem we've found with the physical is making sure the Wi-Fi antenna can still see Wi-Fi signals, but heat has not seemed to be a problem. Yes?
Is there a limitation on capacity of the SD cards?
Let's see. That is a good question, and I would actually have to look that up. There is a limitation, and off the top of my brain, I'm trying to think if it was 32 or 64 gig. But the thing is, with all these old files, it's really rare that we would be able to fill up an SD card with that.
Oh, I'm not worried about filling it up. I'm worried about being able to find people nowadays.
Right. Gotcha. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so far, like I've used 32 and 64s and have not had a problem. But I agree, the smaller capacity SD cards are becoming a little bit more difficult to find. But I know that the team will stay on top of that, and if we find that they are no longer being manufactured, their goals are to keep these compatible with present day. So I'm sure that they'll rework the system if they have to adjust what it can handle. So I think that takes care of my time. So thank you very much. And please come see us at our booth.